Okay, so I'm going to be explaining to you how some teenagers, students, and new graduates seem to be able to raise millions of dollars for their own companies whilst they're still studying, and how you can do the same. And this is going to be like a 20-30 minute long video, and if you can't pay attention the entire time, then there's basically no hope for you and you should go back to watching TikTok or whatever. But for those of you who will stay, like you can see over here, there are a bunch of like examples of like London boy wins like $1 million in Silicon Valley investment. This was literally last month at the time I'm posting. Columbia students raise like $4 million for their biotech startup. 16-year-old raises $3.5 million for his carbon removal startup. And yeah, like you see these news stories coming out literally every single month for years. And you might be wondering like, how on earth are they doing this? Like, how can I be doing the same? And like, what can I take from here? But anyway, like, why should you listen to me? I made a previous video where I talked about how I raised $2.5 million and like did this like pretty famous accelerator and stuff. And then things went to shit with my like co-founder who was for that company. But that's besides the point. Like the point is like, how do you get the money to begin with, which we did. And basically like this is the video that I wish I had when I was in college and like university, because basically like this information is all out there on the internet. It's not organized into one place and like no one will put it all together and explain it neatly for you. So that's why I'm making the video. And also I'm making the video for a slightly selfish reason, because the market expands, or like the market rewards whoever seems to expand the market. So for example, you're watching this video on YouTube and YouTube like expanded the market of content creators. Like there are millions of content creators on YouTube. The people who made YouTube got a lot of money doing it. The content creators got a lot of money doing it. And many of the viewers got a lot of value from the videos. It's like a positive sum game for everyone benefits. So by making like some kind of information or some like advice basically free for everyone, that benefits me, but it also benefits you. And it's pretty unclear how it will benefit me, but we'll see later. But yeah, basically like who are these people getting the money from? Like who is giving them millions of dollars? And they're getting money from usually venture capitalists, and the money does not go to them, it goes to the company. And they basically start a company for one particular product or idea that they have. They give away some fraction of the company known as equity. So they might give away 5% for like $100,000 or 10% or whatever. Basically, they don't explain how much of the company they gave away in these stories, but they gave away usually like 10-20% of their company in the early stages at least. And they're getting their money from venture capitalists, and venture capitalists are basically people who are actively looking for in companies to invest in. And this can be at different stages. Some venture capitalists like to invest in very early stage companies that are like literally just an idea or a prototype. Some venture capitalists like to invest in late stage companies that have been going on for a couple of years. And basically they raise something called a fund. So some venture capitalists, they don't have the money themselves. Like they will go and raise the money from somewhere else, just like how your company is raising the money. Some of them might be rich and they might put out some of their own money into the fund. But basically what they do is they go to a bunch of LPs or limited partners and raise a fund of like $50 million or whatever. And this could be like an AI fund or a biotech fund or like a consumer mobile app fund or a robotics fund. They basically raise a fund, which is a pool of money for a certain topic. And they say to like their limited partners, oh, we will give you like 4x returns over the next 10 years if you give us like this amount of money. So for example, one venture capitalist fund would go and raise like $50 million from a bunch of LPs, limited partners, rich people. And they would say to all of them, like, we will give you like 4x returns, 3x returns over the next 10 years. And that's a pretty good stable deal. And especially if the venture capitalist has a track record of they've done this previously and they're raising an even bigger fund, then they will usually get the money quite easily. And these LPs are literally just either governments in some cases. For example, like many states, like funds like Singapore or like Qatar, they invest in venture funds and they also invest in companies in their own country as well. It's rich people who are kind of like, they have a lot of money already because they've made it previously and they're looking for places to invest it, which is particularly interesting for them rather than just investing it in the stock market. And also university endowments. So when you look at universities like Princeton, Harvard, Yale, even some UK universities, they have like billions of dollars in endowments. I think Harvard have like $40 billion in like endowment, and they put some of that money into venture capitalists or like venture funds like Sequoia Capital, which is a pretty famous venture fund. They give some money to them and then they invest that money and then they're promised like more money back in the future. So like Harvard University has like $40 billion. It's unclear where all that money is, but some hundreds of millions of it goes to venture-backed startups. And also it comes from other places like pension funds and just other investment opportunities. But yeah, these are the main sources. So what LPs do is they give that money to venture capitalists who then go out and find companies to invest in particular areas or domains. And then they will sell or like buy some portion of the company. And they will sell that portion of the company once the company is more valuable in the future and then give the returns back to the LPs. And you can see this happening in this particular case, like Peter Thiel, who was the first big investor in Facebook. He initially invested $500,000 in Facebook back in like 2006 or whatever. This article is from 2012. Oh, I think it was 2004 when Facebook started. He invested $500,000, and when he cashed out in 2012, it became $1 billion of cash. And that's like a 200,000% return on his investment. And this is like what is known as like the power law, especially in venture capital, where you will have or you will invest in a lot of different companies, and some companies will become absolutely massive like Facebook did. And your return for investing in that company, or like the amount of your value shares of the company is now worth, is like a huge amount. And these kind of outlier returns is what leads to venture capitalists finding companies to invest in. So yeah, you can see it over here. This is a VC power law where 97% of exit profits are generated by less than 0.1% of startups. So you basically, like as a VC, you go out and find companies that are potential winners, can be absolutely huge in the future, and then you invest in them, and then they may be huge, and then you make a lot of money as a result. And your limited partners also make money. So venture capitalists, whilst they don't have the money themselves, they usually put in some of their own money into the fund because they also want returns, and they also charge like an administration fee for the fund that they raised. So they would also be paid by the LPs for doing the work. But yeah, you can see over here that there's a right skew distribution of US venture returns. Yeah, so 64% of companies don't break even at all. 25% do 1 to 5x returns, 5.9 do 5 to 10x returns, 2.5, and then you have like a huge outlier, which is like 0.4% doing 50x returns. So if you have a $50 million fund and you invest in 100 different companies at $500,000 each, then if one of those companies ends up being like Facebook and all the other companies failed, which can be quite rare, but like if 99 companies failed and one company that you invested in became the next Facebook, then you would still have a 40x return on your investment, in this case for getting $1 billion. But yeah, that's basically like why they do it, and why would you do it as well? Like why would you ask them for money? And it's usually because you want like faster growth for whatever idea you have. You need capital to make an idea possible, or like you have a prototype and you want to bring it to market. Or you just also want to build connections as well, because when you receive VC funding and you do particularly well, then you end up making a lot of connections in the startup ecosystem and like the venture financing ecosystem, such that even if your company did fail or it wasn't as successful in the sense like it made a 1 to 5x return instead, you can still get a job and you can still like become a venture capitalist and you can still do other things as well. But the faster growth part is pretty important in the sense like, for example, like if you had a app or a software or something and it was charging a monthly subscription and you were growing, you were making like $10,000 a month and you're growing steadily, like, I don't know, like 30% month a month or something, which is pretty good. It will take you quite a while to be able to afford an office. It will take you quite a while to be able to make your first hire and so forth. So you will have to wait like 6 months to make your first hire. And you basically want the cash sooner, or you want cash sooner to be able to make like hires and like office space and equipment and everything. So you would go to venture capitalists and you would ask them for money, and then they will give you a lot of money up front, and then you can use that money to make the hire, and then potentially you can grow fast in the future. So that's basically why most people raise venture capital. And now it becomes a question of like how you can do it, because it's pretty clear like they won't give you the money directly. It comes to you in the form of company. Like you have to set up a company and you have to be working on an idea which seems promising and could potentially return a lot of money in the future, and then they will give you the money. And this is like the key part here. Like it has to be an idea that can return a lot of money in the future. If you set up a, say, restaurant business, like you're not going to have many investors in a restaurant business, because a restaurant business isn't going to give like a 200,000% return potentially in the future. I don't think that's ever happened. But for technology companies, usually it does happen, because at least for software, like your software could become an overnight success in many cases, such as Facebook was. where like you go from having a couple hundreds or a couple thousands of users to literally having millions of users. That's why they usually like to invest in technology. And it doesn't necessarily have to be software either. It can be hardware as well. For example, Nvidia received venture capital funding. Apple did, Microsoft did. Basically, every big company that you can think of, at some point, they received venture funding. And yeah, then the venture capitalists were happy. The company gave a big return to them. They sold their fraction or they kept their fraction of the company. And now they're looking for more opportunities because that's their job. So now it's a question of like, how can you raise venture capital funding yourself, especially as a student or like a 16-year-old or if you're in college? And there are a couple of ways of doing this. The most common path, or the path that I took, was being part of a startup accelerator. And a startup accelerator basically is like they have an application form. You go on a website, you apply, and they accept like 200 people, 300 people. It depends on how big it is every cycle. So they might have one cycle being 8 weeks, 3 months, 6 months, or something. And they basically accept a bunch of people. And examples are like Y Combinator. Y Combinator has 200 to 300 companies a batch. They do 4 batches a year now. Techstars as well, Entrepreneur First. And they give you some money as part of like getting accepted. So for example, Y Combinator, if you get accepted, you get $500,000, which me and my co-founder for the company that got accepted did. And then like things went to like shit. But you can watch a video on that separately. And then basically during the accelerator, you like work on your idea, you work on your product, and they help you because they have a lot of guidance and experience, and they give you a lot of advice of helping you make a better product. And then you like pitch venture capitalists, or they have like a final day, which is a demo day, and then you pitch your idea to like investors. And investors who like your idea will then reach out to you, and then you raise a round of like you get accepted, you work on your idea, it shows some promise, you get some traction, you get some customers in a short period of time. It's growing quite steadily. And then you pitch your idea on a demo day, and then investors get access to like a portal. So I invested in a few Y Combinator companies myself as well, and we get access to a portal where you can view everyone's pitch, you can see what the company does, then you can reach out to the founder or the people running the company, like the usually 2 or 3 co-founders. And then you can discuss terms with them. And if you're interested in the technology, the idea, then you're like, hey, I want to invest like $50,000 at these terms. Or you say like, I want to invest like $300,000 at these terms for this percentage. And then as a company founder, you get like 10 of these, 20 of these, you get a bunch of interested investors, and you raise a round. And altogether, you may end up raising like $1 million, $2 million, in some cases like $4 million or $30 million. Basically depends on how promising your idea can seem and how much traction you already have. And you can go on Y Combinator's website and you can see like a bunch of companies that previously raised a lot of money, raised a lot of rounds, and you can also apply yourself. So I think, so yeah, especially if you're a student, it's worth applying to some of these accelerators. There are many more that you can find a list of online, and some specialize in certain things. For example, some may specialize in biotech or like healthcare, but others seem to be more broad. Some of them you need a co-founder and you need an idea for. For example, like Y Combinator, usually everyone has an idea when applying and a co-founder. You don't necessarily need a product. It depends on the accelerator. And for things like Entrepreneur First, you don't even need a co-founder and you don't even need an idea. They basically help you find a co-founder and an idea during the program. So yeah, a accelerator is a pretty good way of getting your foot in the door. The next thing is angel investors. So basically, angel investors are rich people who have like millions or tens of millions or even hundreds of millions, and they're just kind of bored and they're old and they like want to give money forward, so they want to invest in something interesting. And often these can be people in your local city. So for example, like I went to the University of Cambridge, there was a group called Cambridge Angels, and they are an angel network mostly based around Cambridge, but around the UK as well. And basically, like they invested £42 million, or about like $55–60 million in 2024 into individual and corporate members. And yeah, basically, like you would apply to them, you would reach out to them, you would find individual angels, or you can find angel networks by searching online, even your city or in a particular field or domain like healthcare, biotech, AI startups, etc. And you would reach out to them and then present your idea. And you can also find angels on like Twitter as well, because a lot of people on Twitter are rich and they're looking for places to invest their money, which seem particularly interesting for them. You can also get introductions to them as well through like friends or family, and you can also ask friends or family for like investment money. But usually many people don't have rich friends or family, but they might know like their uncle who is connected to such and such, who is connected to such and such, and they would ask for an introduction and then pitch their idea. And yeah, angel investors usually invest anywhere between like a few thousands of dollars to like a few hundreds of thousands of dollars. It depends on how rich the angel investor is. I've also invested in a few companies in YC, which is usually within the thousands of dollars range. And basically, like, they do it because it's kind of boring to have your money sitting around doing nothing. Like, many of these people have millions or tens of millions of dollars, and they find it boring to just have it sitting in the stock market or sitting in like treasury bonds or whatever else. And also, they want to feel like they are having a positive impact on the world through investing, especially in things that they're interested in. So, if you're reaching out to angel investors and you're like doing a quantum startup or whatever, making quantum computers, then if you reach out to one who has no experience in quantum computers, they're likely to say no because they don't understand your idea. They don't understand if it's good or feasible or anything. So you may want to find people who are related to whatever domain you're currently in or what you're focusing on. If they've invested in previous companies like that, then it's usually good. And they're also investing because it gives them clout. Like they just get like good reputation, or they just like are good if they invest in the right companies. So for example, like some people who invested in Uber very early on, so I think there's one guy who invested like $50,000 into Uber, and it became like hundreds of millions of dollars once Uber IPO'd. And he gets clout by writing on Twitter or introducing himself as like one of the first investors in Uber. And that gives them more opportunities, which is why they're also doing it as well. Now the next option may even be your own university. Like your university may have a fund which invests in companies that are like based or were started by students of that university or are currently students. So you can see over here that like UK university spin out startup funding grows 38% year on year. 98% of UK's like Russell Group universities have university affiliated venture funds for spinouts. And then these are examples of companies that spun out of a university and they raised money. But in the case of like university startups or using university companies, they usually, a few things happen. Like they take equity in your startup as well. So for example, like Oxford or Cambridge, if there is a particular bit of research or intellectual property that was developed within the university laboratories that is now becoming a startup, for example, in the biotech space, then whatever IP was like being used, the university sees it as being theirs because they provided the facilities and labs. So they will take some portion of the company. So they may take 10%, 20% of the company as part of you spitting out and starting a company. So if you're a researcher right now, or you're a PhD student, and you find like a particularly promising thing, and it could be a business idea, it could be a startup idea, then the university may give you some funding, they will take some equity, and they may even help you acquire more funding from like external sources that they're affiliated with. And then you would like continue like growing the company. Your own equity in the company would be worth more because like, of course, you as a founder of the company would be getting equity, except you would be giving away some equity bit by bit to raise money to make the company more valuable. So your own equity is worth more. And yeah, like there are literally hundreds of thousands or like thousands of examples of this online. You hear many cases of this. You want to consult with your university and see what they have on offer. The next thing is approaching venture capitalists directly. So usually you can approach many of these VCs or VC funds that you hear about directly. Some of them you can't really approach directly if you're a nobody or like you don't have any connections, because some of them require what's known as warm intros, in the sense you need someone who already knows someone who works there to introduce you. And that can take many forms, because it can just be an email where like someone who knows both of you ends up connecting you to someone who works there, or it can be like over a dinner or just anything else. And then there's also cold outreach, where you can reach out to VC funds such as like Hustle Fund directly. Like Sequoia Capital is a very established fund, and they like usually require warm intros to be able to like be reached out to basically. Whereas Hustle Fund, you can just go on their website and you can fill out a form with an idea that you have, or like a product that you're developing, or some revenue thing that you have, and they will basically reply to you, and if they're interested, they will like schedule a meeting and so forth. And there's a huge website called vcsheets.com, I think. I'll put it in the description down below. And there are 930 funds on there which invest at different stages. So like seed and pre-seed is probably what you're looking for. You're not looking for Series A and Series B, because those are later more established companies. And you can go on their website, or you can just like contact someone who works there directly. Chances are, if they don't respond to your message, then basically you would require a warm intro to be able to get in contact with them. And I think Sequoia Capital is one of the oldest and most established, or like well branded venture capitalist funds, because they were like one of the first investors in Apple. They invested in like a bunch of other big companies, I think like Amazon, Google, Nvidia, so forth. And they have huge amounts of assets, and they have like huge amounts that they get from the LPs. So like Harvard University, part of the endowment they give to Sequoia Capital so they can get returns from it. And they basically have so much money that they have to refuse like money from like limited partners, because so many people want to give money to Sequoia Capital to then invest into companies. And the final way is just getting noticed. Like you can just get noticed online, because that's the power of the internet, either on Twitter or LinkedIn. And this can take a couple of different forms. Like it would usually require you to have some kind of product or prototype or launch or whatever. So for example, like David Park on Twitter, he just shared his like MMR graph. He was like, we got our first 100K angel tech check exactly 3 years ago. Today we reached 500K MMR, which is monthly recurring revenue. And we can now make the equivalent of the angel check every 6 days. So when he posts a picture like this gets like thousands of likes. Many venture capitalists, because they hang out on Twitter a lot, or they talk and write on Twitter a lot, they will see this and they'll be like, wow, these guys are growing, and then reach out to David Park to be like, hey, I want to invest. And they don't really need any more investment anymore, because you don't want too much investment, otherwise you will dilute your share of the company too much. So often they just say no, and then that leaves like VCs eager queuing up to invest. There's another case where like this guy, he just shares his OpenAI bill, and then a venture capitalist would see this and be like, wow, these guys are really taking off, or like they're making a lot of money, or like they have a lot of users or something. Like this kind of mysterious aspect to it. And then like they would reach out and be like, hey, like, can we hear more? Can we invest in your company or something? And trust me, like VCs spend hours every day on Twitter, because this is like the place to be for them. And then there are other cases where like someone just launches a product. I saw this literally earlier today. And this person, Helena Zhang, introduced Pocketflow, which is like automating lead generation. She gives like a demo of it. It got a bunch of like likes and bookmarks, and probably a bunch of venture capitalists noticed this. They thought it was a cool product, and then they like DM'd her, or they contacted her being like, hey, we're interested in investing. And you can also post on LinkedIn as well. But when you're getting noticed, you usually need to have some kind of product, because like how else are you going to get noticed? You're not going to get noticed for an idea. You're going to get noticed for having a product, even if that's a prototype, and having traction, and then like casually like bragging or humble bragging or whatever on Twitter. And then you'll have VCs reaching out to you in like no time. And you don't even need that many followers. Like some of these people only have a couple hundred followers, but they manage to get close to 1,000 likes. And you only need to be seen or get likes or bookmarks by the right people. Like you don't need hundreds of likes or followers or views on your tweet to be able to get the attention of VCs. And also, since the VC community is pretty small, like if you get introduced to one, or one reaches out to you, then they will have many friends who are VCs as well. You work at different funds, and they can also help you to get investment money. And even in many of these cases, like you may have the company set up under your own name, or like you don't even have a company set up, but you still have a prototype and you're sharing about it online. They can often just help you set up a company, like do the legal work, paper registration, because when you're raising money for venture capital, or like you're raising like venture capital funding, then you usually require or need to have like a specific legal structure or entity structure that protects the investors against like many different conditions. So for example, like there's a Delaware C Corp. Most of the Fortune 500 companies that you see in the world are Delaware C Corps, because a Delaware C Corp is quite easy to set up, and it also offers investors a bunch of protections as well that they quite like. There are other cases where like if you apply for Y Combinator and you get accepted and you don't have a company, then you are required to either set up a Cayman Islands company, a Singaporean company, or a Delaware C Corp. And you don't have to be like registered or a citizen of any of those countries to be able to set up a company over there. Or if you already have a company, then they would require you to flip over into that style of company. So it really depends on your investors, but I think usually most investors, they'll be very happy to invest in a Delaware C Corp. And sometimes they might refuse an investment or refuse to invest because your company is not like the right structure for them. And then this leads me on to like two more questions of whether you need a co-founder and whether you need a product as well. Because in these cases of like getting noticed, all these people have products. Like usually when you're applying for some of these accelerators, they also ask you for your product. And the confusion or a misconception that a lot of people have is that they're like, oh, I need venture capital funding and then I can start building the product. And like, how can I have a product without funding? And in many of these cases, you will not get funding. The people who are getting the funding without a product are usually second time founders. Like they started a company previously, it was successful, they sold the company, the venture capitalists got a lot of money, they got a lot of money, and then they like went to a beach, they like drank martinis or whatever all day, and then they got bored, and then they're like, man, I'm gonna start another company. And then after starting another company, like they don't yet have a product, but from their previous company success, they have venture capitalist connections and they have a lot of faith in them already that they can make this a big company as well. So whenever you see people who say like, oh, you don't need a product or you don't need like a prototype or anything, it's usually like people who are using examples of second time founders where they already have the connection, they already have the reputation, and they already have the faith. For example, like I think one of the OpenAI co-founders previously left like a couple of months ago. I think it's Ilya or whatever. And he raised like $1 billion because he has a track record, he has connections, so he can raise money without a product. But like chances are, if you're watching this video, you're not a second time founder, you would be a first time founder, and you would usually require some kind of product or prototype. And it may not end up being whatever you end up working on exactly. So for example, like many people apply to Y Combinator with an idea, and it's kind of clear that they can build that idea. So for example, like they did computer science previously at university, or they worked for an app studio, or they made their own mobile app or website or something. Like they basically have some experience that shows that they can make a product that is what they're saying they want to make. So for example, like if they're applying to Y Combinator with an idea for an application, like a mobile app, and they studied computer science and they did an internship at like Meta or Google or like somewhere else, then it's pretty clear that they can build it. But if they're playing with an idea for a mobile app and from their like experience or record, they like did like humanities, there's like no clear indication they even know like anything about apps or like how technology works or like how a computer works. Like if there's no evidence, then you're much less likely to get funding without the actual product or like prototype. And in many cases, like people apply with a product or prototype, and then during the accelerator or like after speaking to venture capitalists, they would prefer them to work on something slightly different or slightly like else instead. For example, like they might make a mobile app for like, I don't know, like helping restaurants manage their ordering systems or whatever. And they've already made it and it's like live on the App Store, and like they apply to Y Combinator with the idea. But Y Combinator also say on their form, like if you have any other ideas, then like fill out this part of the form and let us know. And then usually people fill out that form of other ideas as well. And even though Y Combinator don't like the fact that, I don't know, it's a restaurant booking app or whatever, the fact that they were able to make it from scratch and like make it live on the App Store or something gives them confidence that, hey, if they work on something else, then they can usually build the other thing. And this is basically a way for the VCs to slightly de-risk themselves, because they have plenty of people like reaching out to them with ideas for products that they have, and it's pretty unclear whether they can actually build the product itself. So for example, like if you and your friends are starting a company and you all study like history or English literature or something, and you have an idea that you're gonna build like a mini nuclear fusion reactor that will help power your laptop or whatever instead, then they're going to be very skeptical that you can actually go ahead with the thing. Like whilst they think that it is a good idea, they will just not invest because they don't think you can actually make it. Like that is the whole point. And some people think like, oh, we're going to raise the money and then we're going to hire people to make it for us. And it almost never really works because like VCs have seen that it doesn't work. You usually need someone on the founding team to be able to make or do the thing that you're saying you can do. And it usually requires people to have experience in that particular domain. And that's part of having a product as well, or having an idea. Like it doesn't really make sense to work on a product that you don't know you can make good or you don't have experience in. So for example, like if I'm making software for like, I don't know, oil rigs, or like people who work on oil rigs, they need software to manage like all the oil they're getting out of the ground and like where to ship it and everything like that. If I've never worked on an oil rig before in my life, like I can try making software by potentially speaking to people who have, but I wouldn't know what good software for oil rig looks like because I've never worked at one. So usually whatever idea or product you have, it depends on like your own experience. So you could have done an internship at like a law firm or whatever, or you could have done like or your parents could have worked on like finance or like actuarial like stuff or something. And they like taught you a lot about that growing up, and they have a good sense of what a good product for like actuaries is like, and then they can help you in that. So you want to make sure whatever product idea you have, it like fits you and like your own experience, because people will be pretty skeptical if you're working on an idea that doesn't fit you. And in many cases, you may apply to like Y Combinator or like another accelerator, and they invest you, but they want you to work on a different idea. So I know there was one case that I heard about where like 3 physics PhD students like were friends. They applied together to YC at Y Combinator, and the idea was like a dating app, and I don't know how it was differentiating itself from other dating apps, but yeah, they basically had a dating app idea. Then they were accepted, but the like partners or the YC people who run it was saying to them like, why would you work on a dating app? Like you three have physics PhDs, which is like pretty rare, right? So you should work on something related to physics and like start a company or like um work on an idea which is basically physics related and solves a problem in that domain. And that could be like superconductors or like, I don't know, basically some kind of physics related thing, because you want to make sure you're using your experience and skill set. And if you don't have experience or skill set, then you should go out and get some. And that can involve like doing some internships at different companies, getting a sense of what kind of problems those companies face, and then being able to think about a product or a solution to those companies' problems. And then like you can apply with that product, and you can also make the product, and then you can also sell it back to the people you worked for. Or basically getting a sense of the market and seeing like a new thing has happened that makes a product now possible. In the sense, this is like a common why now question that many venture capitalists may ask you, where there are many ideas that people have that they could have done 5 years ago, or someone else could have done 5 years ago or 10 years ago. A pretty common example is like app idea that a lot of college students have is, I'm going to make an app to help me meet up with my friends. Like me and my 6 friends, it's so hard to organize a time where that we're all free. So I'm going to make an app that helps us do that. And this is an idea that literally hundreds of thousands or like tens of thousands of college students have had. And there is no like new thing that now makes it possible. Like this idea would have been possible 5 years ago, 10 years ago. And the fact that there isn't an app that is widespread or like has taken off is usually a sign that the idea is a bad idea. Like think about it. Other people have made it the same app before, and you're not using the app. It's because it's a bad idea usually, or like the app just doesn't spread. People prefer organizing times over group chats. So if you apply with an idea that doesn't really have a clear why now, or you pitch a venture capitalist an idea that doesn't have a why now, then they're pretty skeptical of like, why does it make sense for you to be working on this whenever people potentially may have tried this before you and failed? And a common why now may be something like, a new piece of legislation has come into action in your state or country, or something that makes something now required or possible. So for example, like I think in the US, there was some kind of legislation that came into action which requires like employers to do something with health insurance for their employees. I don't know too much about the specifics, but that prompted a surge in companies who would then like came up to help employers do exactly that. And they managed to get a lot of sales because they came just in time. So that's like a good why now. Or like, let's say you live in Brazil or like another country, and now the government wants like some specific thing happening for payments, where like payments have to be verified by some kind of like third party measures or whatever. Like I'm pretty bad at making up these examples, but basically like if a new piece of law or legislation comes into action that requires something, that is often a good time or a good why now. Another thing is like technology, in the sense like there are a lot more drone companies now, because drones have gotten to a point whereby like the weight to like thrust ratio of the drone now makes many drones possible. Like drones what kind of existed like in the early 2000s and 1990s, but they weren't widespread like consumer drones are. And then some bit of technological development happened where it might have been a research paper or something, or it might have been like a specific motor was now possible and widespread and cheap enough that they're now everywhere. Like anyone can go and buy a consumer drone for like $20, $30. And a pretty common why now that you see with a lot of companies is AI. Like large language models, we have had AI for a while of like, we could recognize numbers in like the 90s to like pretty good accuracy. But now we've gotten to a pretty good point with AI where it can do like a lot of tasks pretty well, where it can generate images, it can like run its own commands, it can like help you write code. Basically, within the last few years, AI has gotten really good and it led to a new generation or a new spawn of companies. Another generation or spawn was like when mobile apps first became like a big thing of like the iPhone came out, there was an app store, you could make iPhone apps for the app store. And back in like 2008 and early 2010s, everyone was making mobile apps. Now everyone seems to be working on AI stuff because it's like what is now possible. If you make a mobile app now that was possible 10 years ago, then many VCs may be like, why are you making this now? Like, what is special about it now? If it incorporates AI in some way, then they can see why. And another pretty important aspect of this is like whether you need a co-founder. In many cases, like you will see people start companies by themselves, or you will see like a headline where they started by themselves. And it's because they often have enough experience doing a company previously by themselves that like the venture capitalists or the people investing in them have conviction that they can make it possible that by themselves. For example, they may have previously started and scaled a company to like 5 million, $10 million or whatever. And they basically like venture capitalists have conviction they can do it again. Whereas like for the average new founder or the average student or someone who hasn't previously started a company before, you almost always need a co-founder in the sense like VCs want to de-risk themselves. Like starting a company is very hard, making a good product is very hard, getting customers is very hard. And the way they see it is like if you invest in one individual by themselves to like do everything themselves, then they're gonna have a really hard time. And if they're feeling down one day because like their product doesn't work as well as they hoped it should and stuff like that, there is no one to cheer them up and there's no one to like really help them do better or get back on track. Whereas if you have two co-founders, then one person can kind of lift the other person up when things are going bad or like going down. And generally, in the case of venture capitalists, like they notice companies are more successful when there are multiple founders. So you see a lot of companies with like two co-founders. Like one person is like the technical guy or like the CTO. One person is a CEO who manages all the like other things which isn't technical. Or you have three co-founders where one person is like CEO in charge of sales and like marketing and everything like that. And then you have two technical people. And rarely you have companies with four co-founders. After four co-founders, it gets a bit tricky of like, are they really going to all get along to the same degree? Are there going to be communication issues? So generally, two co-founders, three co-founders, sometimes four co-founders is like a good point. But if you're starting a company for the first time, you'll rarely get accepted or you'll rarely get funding as a one co-founder, like on your own, or one founder yourself, because like VCs have like a bunch of historical patterns or trends that they've noticed over time. And they notice that companies who are started by people who are solo don't tend to last. And there's some cases like Dropbox, when it first started, I think it was the founder himself, but then he brought on another co-founder later, like a couple months or like a year into starting the company. And one more thing to mention with whether you need a product, like sometimes a product may not be possible itself because it's like very complicated, it's very hard to make, but you have a prototype of a much simpler version of if you were starting a drone company, like you would not go out and try to make a consumer graded drone or like the DJI Mavic 3 or whatever. You would not try to make that. You would make a very rough prototype to show that it's possible for like cheap parts and then raise money based on that. And in some cases, like if you just can't raise money because it requires so much funding or like it requires so much initial like capital to get the product off the ground, it may be worth considering a different idea that is easier or like doesn't require funding as much. In the sense, like many ideas which are like software, you can just make software like coding away at your computer for very, very cheap. And once you have the software, then you can raise money based on that. You can like grow the company. You can then make a lot of money from the company and then you can exit or sell the company. And then you can consider working on something which is more technical. So for example, like Elon Musk, he initially started Zip2, which was like a Google Maps, a Yelp, like mapping software system, which helps you find like places in your city. And I think he sold that for like $30 million or something. And then he focused on SpaceX, because now he had a bunch of money or he had millions from doing software, which was much cheaper to make and produce, that he could work on something much more expensive like rockets and then also get money and funding for rockets as well. So yeah, if you have an idea and you're struggling to get funding, then it's potentially worth working on the easier idea and then working on the harder, more difficult idea in the future. And there's a bit of a difference or trend that you notice, especially if you spend a lot of time inside the venture capital communities or reaching out to VCs, where there's a difference between European VCs and US VCs. So US VCs generally invest more money, and they are generally more like they do take on more risks. European VCs are usually more risk averse, where a US VC might invest in you just having a prototype or just having the product, and they're really convinced that it's good, and they understand why it's good as well. Whereas European VCs usually spend less money, and they're usually less convinced by products on their own. They want to see revenue and traction. Like if you have money flowing in, and if you have like monthly growth, even users, or like I don't know, development on your product, or like maybe like the amount of revenue you're making, then they're more willing to invest. And they might even require you to be making like $10,000 a month or something in terms of revenue coming into your product or company for them to invest. So generally, US VCs give more money. They're more like risk taking. European VCs are more risk averse, and their timelines are usually longer in the sense it takes them longer to get back to you. And in some cases, if you're not able to get revenue immediately for your product because your sales cycles are much longer, then letters of intent usually work pretty well in the sense like if you're making a mobile app or a consumer product, consumer facing product, usually consumers will just look at something and then they might decide to buy it in the moment or not because it's like $20 or $30 per person. But if you're making like business to business enterprise software or something, then you're charging like $5,000, $10,000 a month to other businesses to use your software. Then usually you selling to other businesses or reaching out to them and like pitching your software to them and getting them to use your product and paying for it, those sales cycles are usually much longer because much more people are involved in the decision making process. But having a lead or having like a letter of intent of like, hey, once this product is like fully finished or like fully ready, then we're going to use it. That's a pretty good indication for VCs as well that, hey, these guys have traction or they're making traction on their product. So if you're selling to law firms, like you're not going to be selling a $20 subscription to a law firm because you can charge much more for that. So you can be charging them like $5,000 a month to use your software. But those sales cycles may be longer and it might be like 1 or 2 months before they're fully committed because they have to discuss it internally with the team. They need to make sure it meets like privacy regulations like GDPR or you have some kind of compliance as well, the way you're handling the data. So they require all this information. But they would still be interested in using your product, and that's a good way to get money because you can show that interest to VCs. And this kind of relates back to getting noticed as well. Like you can get noticed in a bunch of different ways because getting noticed leads to interest. So if you post about your product online and you say like, oh, we just signed on like 20 new clients this month or whatever, then you will have people reaching out to you as well, venture capitalists who want to invest. And it can be things that can go viral as well in the sense like, for example, there is no good AI video editor right now in the sense like I can't take the raw footage for my videos from my camera, put it into a website and say, hey, I want it edited in the style of like Ali Abdaal or Iman Ghazi or whatever, right? So if there ends up being one and you make one, then you record a demo of like you doing this where you get raw footage, you say, I want it edited in the style of MrBeast, and then an AI automatically edits a whole video for you, and you post about it online, then you're going to get like, I don't know, like hundreds or even thousands of likes. You're going to get tons of venture capitalists reaching out to you because they already realize how big of a market that potentially is. In many cases, they may not realize how big of a market you're tackling because they don't understand the problem well enough. And this is where reaching out to the correct or right VCs is important. In the sense like, if there is a venture capitalist fund that usually invests in like travel companies or travel apps or whatever, and you're reaching out with a biotech idea, like they're not going to invest in you. Or if you're doing the opposite, where you have a travel app and it's growing steadily and you're like getting a lot of users and you're making money, and you reach out to a VC fund that usually invests in like hard tech or like deep tech, like nuclear reactors or like fusion technology or superconductors or whatever, right? If you reach out to them, they're not going to invest in you because each VC has its own specialty or has its own expertise. They don't know if your product is possible in-house if they don't have specialty in it. So if you're making like a device that takes in air from the surrounding environment, like compresses that air, turns it into power, and then powers your laptop, and you have a prototype, they might be convinced by the prototype and they might invest based on that. But if you only have an idea, or you have like the mathematical theory written out of why this should be possible, they're not going to understand that. So they're not going to invest because of that. So it definitely helps you reach out to the correct kinds of VCs and angel investors who you think will be familiar with what you're working on, given their background or previous expertise in investing. And part of the strategy of getting noticed on Twitter is like a constant cycle of like, you don't want to post it once, you want to like post it continuously, where you would post like new updates, like new features that you released, new milestones that you hit, or like you hit like 10,000 users, or like a new hires that you made. Basically posting milestones online and getting likes will end up attracting a lot of VCs who spend a lot of time on Twitter. And some of these VCs actually want you to reach out to them as well, because they're also writing articles or going on podcasts and basically getting their own name known. Because sometimes when you're a really successful company and you have so many investors reaching out to you, you get to pick and choose an investor. And usually the best companies have so many investors reaching out to them that they pick and choose investors based on who they like, rather than accepting money from everyone. So many VCs, what they do is they go on Twitter and LinkedIn, they write like posts which are educational and informative to kind of like build a brand image or name around their name, such that when they reach out to you with like saying, I want to invest in your company, you'd be much more willing to say yes because you have heard of their name before. And this aspect also leads to some kind of mimetic behavior amongst VCs. In the sense, like, if you look online, you can search this online, where you can see Airbnb were rejected by like the first 7, 8 investors that they reached out to. And they posted these rejection letters online because they weren't really convinced by the idea. Sometimes some of the most counterintuitive ideas can have the most success or most like traction and end up like taking the world by storm, because it was just like so far removed from what people would usually think is like fine or good, or like so counterintuitive, in the sense like Uber is worth tens of billions of dollars. It's now public on the stock market. When they were first pitching the idea, people would be like, why would you need an Uber? Like, why would you use an app to get a car on your phone, which is some random stranger coming to you and picking you up, when you can just like pick up the phone, call a taxi, and they might take roughly the same time. So venture capitalists, even though they frame themselves as having like some kind of massive foresight, or they're like experts in their domain, they usually don't they miss ideas, because some of the best ideas are really counterintuitive. For example, in Airbnb's case, it's like, why would I stay in an Airbnb when I can just go to a hotel in that city instead? But like Airbnb is worth tens of billions and people book on Airbnb. I booked an Airbnb like 10 plus times. And in hindsight, it's very obvious that Airbnb would have been successful and Uber would have been successful. But at the time, because of how novel it was and because of how new it was not like they struggled to get funding at the beginning. And Airbnb would have died if they didn't get like the check from Y Combinator that they did. And the same thing even happened with SpaceX as well, where like many people at NASA were saying like, oh, reusable rockets aren't useful, or like, why would we need the reusable rockets or whatever? And now SpaceX is worth tens of billions of dollars. And also like for Nvidia is, I think, second or most valuable company in the world as of recording. And basically like in the early 90s, when they were making the first graphics cards and graphics processing units, people were like, why would you use this? Like many experts as well in the domains and fields and venture capitalists would say that. Or why would you need this when you can just we have the CPU? And now Nvidia, like, it's very good for gaming. It's very good for like mining Bitcoin, or like just doing a lot of concurrent operations at once because of its parallel processing power. And now in the recent AI wave or AI trend, it's grown massively because NVIDIA GPUs are really, really good for AI. But that was not seen 30 years ago at the time when they were first getting funding for NVIDIA. So ultimately the point is like many venture capitalists or many angel investors like to frame themselves as being like world-class experts in whatever domain or field. But when you ask them, or like you probably shouldn't ask them, but when you look at the investments that they missed out on because they were skeptical or because they didn't have the foresight that the founders did of the company that reached out to them, when you look at that, then you realize that, oh, they just kind of like write stuff online, and some of them do have expertise and some of them are special. But the vast majority of them aren't really. So like, don't take it personally if some investors end up saying no to you. I think it just means that you should get more product, like you should get your product done, you should get more traction, and then eventually the traction speaks for itself. And this is on to a related point where like when you reach out to venture capitalist or like any of these like angel investors or whatever, usually they won't say no directly to you. They'll usually give a convoluted answer, or they'll be like, maybe, perhaps, or like reach out to us again when you hit a milestone or whatever. Basically, they're trying to like be very friendly or very nice because they don't want to be like, hey, your product fucking sucks. Like, you should make a better product. Like, no one's gonna use this shit or whatever. Like, they're not gonna say that because they don't want to like burn bridges. They don't want to ruin a potential relationship with you. Because if they're nice to you and your product does have traction and it does take off in the future, then they can still invest in you in the future because they haven't ruined that relationship. Whereas if they told you your product sucks and then it took off and they were wrong, then you would not let them invest in your product because you would hold a grudge against them. So basically, VCs will like kind of say no in a nicer way if they don't want to invest. So yeah, that's a pretty important thing that not a lot of people tell you. Even like the founder of Canva, there's like an interview or like a video of her where she was talking about how she approached hundreds of venture capitalists with her idea for Canva. And many of them didn't reply, many of them said no, but in a nice way. And yeah, now Canva is worth like tens of billions of dollars, and the people who previously said no, but in a nice way, were still able to invest in Canva and still able to get returns because they didn't tell her her product sucks. And basically, the only thing you can do to prove them wrong if they say no to you is to like make the product and then get traction, make it happen, and then prove them wrong, and then you will still get funding. Like ultimately, the biggest indication of whether you will get funding is how much traction or progress or how much development has been made in your product. Like if you're growing without the venture capitalist funding, then they see opportunity and they're like, wow, if we give them money, then they will grow even faster than before, which is what excites them with about growth that people have without any venture capital funding. But anyway, now it's like, what happens after you get funding? Usually you use the money to make the product better. So for example, like you raise some money, now you have money to hire engineers, you have money to like bring on more talent, you can bring on graphic designers if you're making like a software, you can bring on like mechanical engineers if you're making some kind of hardware. You basically use it to make the product better. And then you can also spend that money on like infrastructure, hiring, marketing, and like your own salary as well. Because the thing with venture capital is like, even if you raise $4 million, like some of the stories people have, that $4 million is not your money. It belongs to the company. And you can't take all the money out, pay yourself, and then just disappear because you would likely be arrested or like venture capitalists would file a lawsuit against you or something dangerous like that. So you can't just take the money out of the company. The whole point in startups is that you win and they win if your company is worth a lot. So most of your wealth is in the equity of the company. So many founders, whilst they might have raised $4 million, $5 million, they're only paying themselves a salary of like $100,000 a year, $200,000 a year, basically enough to cover all their essentials and to give them some peace of mind and comfort. So that they can like focus on the company and give the company all their attention so they can grow it as quickly and like as big as possible. So a founder pays themselves salary through their own money, but they have equity in the company. So for example, you and your friends start a company, you would have 50%, they would have 50%, assuming everything is equal and you're putting equal amounts of effort and work into the company. And then you raise some venture capital, say they take 10% of the company for $100,000, then you would be left with 45%, your co-founder would be left with 45%, and then the venture capitalist would have 10%, but now you have $100,000. And then you can pay yourself some salary, you can also hire engineers, you can make your product better, you can keep growing the product. And then the revenue that you're making from the product, you would also be reinvesting that back into the company as well. You're not taking out dividends or you're not taking out money from the company, like extra money besides the salary, because you become rich or you become a billionaire because doing a startup is like the most like surefire way of becoming a billionaire. Almost everyone who has become a billionaire has owned their own company or like done a startup. Many of the world's richest people became billionaires through startups. You only become that by having equity in the company and your company becoming very valuable. So for example, like you give away you now have 45%, your co-founder now has 45%, and then you grow the company, you realize you need to raise more money, so you then raise like $10 million and you give away like 15% or 20% of your company. Now, so far, you've given away 30%. So your co-founder has 35% of the company, you have 35% of the company, and you would carry on giving away a percentage of the company until either you're profitable on its own, in the sense you don't need to raise any more money anymore, or you get acquired, which is the next section. You exit. That's known as exit. You get acquired by a bigger company. So, for example, Loom is a pretty big software. It was acquired by, I think it was at Allison or something. They're a pretty big like software company. YouTube was acquired by Google. Instagram was acquired by Facebook. WhatsApp was acquired by Facebook for like $19 billion. And basically, you get acquired, and then that's your exit. So let's say you have 35% of the company, another company acquires your company for $1 billion. You will get $350 million of that money. And then after tax, that might end up being like 250 million or something, depending on which country you're in. But yeah, basically you get acquired, and the portion of the company that you owned at the time of being acquired ends up being like your liquid cash. And you would not get $350 million through like paying yourself a really high salary. Like most of the world's richest people got it through equity. So you would pay yourself a pretty low salary or a pretty standard salary for a founder. And then you would get most of your riches in the future through getting acquired. And there's also something known as an acqui-hire, where like you get acquired, but you now have to work at the company who acquired you for like 2 years minimum. And your money, the money that you get given, is actually in the form of like stock of the company that acquired you, because often the company that acquired you may be like a public company that can be traded on markets. So your $350 million may actually be in like Microsoft stock if Microsoft acquires you. Another way of exiting, usually exits happen like 7-10 years later after starting. Another way of exiting is through secondaries, where basically a simple way of putting it is you get to very late stage rounds of funding where a lot of the funding is basically like people just buying and selling equity on private markets. So like the stock market is a public market. You can download an app, you can trade on public markets, you can buy shares of Google, Amazon, Facebook, and so forth. There are also private markets where venture capitalist firms, endowments, rich people are buying and selling shares of companies amongst themselves. And Stripe isn't a pretty common example of this. Like Stripe and the co-founders and some of the early employees who got equity in the company, they sold some of the equity through secondaries, where rich endowments and like pension funds and so forth would buy shares of Stripe on private markets. So you and I can't buy them ordinarily. We would have to like be very influential or like big to be able to buy them. And yeah, since someone buyed a bit of your equity, you now have a lot of money. And the final part is like IPOs. So IPOs is basically your company goes public on public markets for anyone to trade. And you, like, once your company goes public, you will have some number of shares of the company that the investment bankers decide. So if you own 35% of the company, they decide to give your company like, I don't know, 1 billion shares. Each share is valued or like at $1 or something, or like $10. There are 1 billion shares, you would own 35% of the shares at the time of going public. And then you can sell your shares on public markets and someone else will buy them, and then you exit that way. And many people, what they do is they like sell some of their shares, they sell some of their equity. They don't sell all of it, because if they did, and they are still working for the company, or like still like the CEO or whatever, then people will be pretty skeptical, because they're like, this person doesn't have skin in the game anymore. Like they don't own any part of that company anymore. So they can just like drive it into the ground if they wanted to. And then they basically wouldn't care if they drive it into the ground. So what happens is like you might sell like 10% or 5% of your like shares that you have, and that can still be full of millions or tens or hundreds, or even some cases billions of dollars, depending on how big your company gets. And you can hold on to shares for an even longer time. So you can like leave the company, have other people take over, the company carries on growing, like in the case of Microsoft and Bill Gates, and you would still own a lot of shares of that company, and that becomes more valuable over time, and you can continue to sell those shares. And yeah, once you exit, you have like millions, hundreds of millions, or billions of dollars. And then you can either continue working on the company because you love it, like it's your baby, it's your product, like you worked on it for so long that you can't imagine doing anything else. Or you can leave the company and have other people like hired instead for the role of a CEO and so forth. And you would still own a lot of equity in the company, and then you can sell at any time, provided the company continues to do well. And then you can live on a beach or whatever. And in many cases, people do this. Like they don't do any more work; they just relax and then retire or enjoy the rest of their life. And especially at a young age because they made a lot of money through startups at a young age. Or you would get bored of life and now you have $50 million and you're like, I'm going to start another company. So that's what a lot of people do. And then for their second company, they have a much easier time raising money because they started a previous company that was successful and their venture capitalists who invested in their previous company were happy. And now they're willing to invest in them again and like back the founder again. So in that case, like even though the person does not have a product, they can get a lot of money quite easily for their new company or new idea. Or in some cases, you might even like start another company or invest your riches back into the ecosystem, whereby you feel gratitude that your like people invested in you quite early on. So you become an angel investor yourself because you now have like a bunch of money lying around doing nothing, and you basically bought everything that you wanted to buy. So then you put it back and you invest in the next generation of founders. You feel like you want to give back to the system, or you become a LP in a venture capital fund. And yeah, so this part finally connects back over here. So you become one of the rich people who give back to LPs. Become an LP, you give back to VCs, and then the VC invest in the next generation of companies. So yeah, that's basically that's entire cycle, and that's how everything works and ties together. And if you have any more questions, like message me on Instagram or something, I'd be happy to answer some of the questions if I know the answer or if I can direct you to like a good place to find the answer. There are also many channels as well that you can go on it as well. There is the Y Combinator official YouTube channel that covers a lot of topics like this. It's quite interesting, quite useful. And they have a lot of videos, so I would recommend watching them. I still enjoy watching the videos too. And yeah, there's also a good channel called Hustle Fund as well, where like these are actual venture capitalists and they actually talk at length in some videos about how to raise money, how to pitch, how to make a pitch, and so forth. So I would recommend checking out these as well. But don't spend all your time actually just watching videos and just reading about venture capital. It's good to understand how it works at a high level, which I explained. Now you should go and like start making a product, or you should start like finding venture capitalists to back your product that you're making. And yeah, that's basically the video. So if you have questions, message me on Instagram and I'll see you next time. Bye.